Look around. Everywhere these days, people are crying out for effective leadership. There's no mistaking it any longer. Men, especially leaders, are struggling, emasculated by imposed rules, stereotyping, and leadership models that are no longer working. There are many women who are doing a much better job at leadership than the men, and we need to recognize them. We need their help too. Welcome to WELL, the Women's Expressions on Leadership, Learning, and Liberty podcast show, and I'm its host, John Krotek. This is the show where women can help us men to be better men, more effective leaders. I am super excited about this guest for this episode of the WELL podcast show. We've been friends for a couple of years before COVID hit. We can talk a little bit about that. But what's more important is she's here today. She's been doing a lot of moving around and she's been helping her daughter. And I'm just so blessed to have Laurie Sudbrink here with me today, who is a fantastic human being and a leadership. She's actually one of the reasons why we have this show is because we want to recognize women who exemplify what I consider leadership, not just from a power over type of leadership, but from a power within. And she exhibits grit, and we'll get to that. But she's been an executive leadership coach and trainer for over 2 decades. You know, we didn't just pull her out of the sky. She's been doing this for a while. She also, what I like about Laurie too, is she has real world business experience. She's not a smoke and mirrors digital person who puts credentials out there that aren't maybe necessarily real. She's done it. She's been in the trenches. She has had her own company and been working with businesses for a long time now. One thing that really attracts me to her leadership style is the book that she wrote. She authored Leading with Grit. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. But that book, again, is not just something off the shelf. It's been endorsed by the guy who wrote the 4 Agreements, Miguel Ruiz. And that book's very popular. I think there's 5 agreements now. And then Ken Blanchard, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager, who I read like in college over 30 years ago. If those guys are going to endorse your book, then you know that what Laurie wrote is something worth reading. But again, I'm honored, blessed, humbled to have Laurie here today on this episode of the WELL podcast. Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you so much, John. I am so excited to have another conversation with you. I thoroughly enjoyed our first one, and I'm eager to see what comes out today.
Me too, you know, and everybody talks or speaks or, you know, we talk about pre-COVID and post-COVID, and Laurie and I just had a short conversation before she came on about how things have changed and how priorities have changed, and we're seeing it in all of our lives. But let's back up, Laurie. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what your family life was like and how you got such great leadership traits in your arsenal of personality. So tell us about that.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, John. You know, we were chatting just a little bit about this before we came on too, is that I grew up in a really small town where cows outnumbered people, you know, just a really tiny community, and middle child of 14. And I know that's like, whoa, you know, it's like, I don't know if anybody listening remembers the Brady Bunch, but we used to call ourselves the Crazy Bunch. We were a blended family. And I think that's really where at least my passion started for this, because to be heard, you know, and to be listened to and all of that in the mixed, you know, in the midst of 14 kids, it was like you needed to rise up, you needed to stand up. And I still say that about leaders today. It's not about a position. Anybody can stand up and be a leader. It's more about what you do, and what you do is driven by your thoughts and your beliefs and your intent behind things. So, you know, that was definitely where I started. And I was one of those kids that I never really knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. Some of my siblings knew exactly what they wanted to be. I kind of stumbled into what I'm doing. I worked for almost 14 years at a very large manufacturing organization in upstate New York. And I started on the factory line. I was a single mom. I was taking classes. And it was probably one of the, well, maybe Ken Blanchard's 1 Minute Manager was something to do with this. It was a class that I took, and I realized I could see like what the leaders were doing, or the people in leadership positions were doing right, what they were doing wrong. And it was so intriguing to me how we treated each other and the impact that had on leadership. I remember just watching that when I was in that organization. And so when the opportunity came up that there was a position to train, I was intrigued by that. It had nothing to do with leadership at the time. It was product training, but I was like, okay, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to, try out for this position. And it was a tryout. They gave us a protocol product that we took home, and we had to come back and do this presentation to, the upper management team on how we would train that. But that's how my whole career in training got started. I did software training, computer training, that kind of thing. And still throughout that organization, I was constantly connecting on the interpersonal side of things. I'm an empath, so I was always like relating to people and having, deep conversations. I even started like a brown bag lunch at one point when we were all struggling, because at the time, the company was looking at Chapter 11, and they did end up filing Chapter 11 and going south. And that was really what made me step back and go, what do you really want to do here? I had been, at that time, it was like 14 years, I had been managing the training function. So I loved the interpersonal side of it. I had been introduced to a really awesome tool called DISC. Used that in most of the foundation of the trainings that I did. And at the time, I wasn't appreciative of it, but later on, I realized that having to have no budget and really get creative in how I brought leadership topics and training to that organization really came in handy, because I decided to start my own business. And I said, I really love this work. I want to go out there and help more organizations to do this. And it's the interpersonal side of things, being able to connect, build emotional intelligence. And that's how the whole company started. And I literally moved, started the company, all in the same year. And it was just me at the time. And I slowly built up the company. I had 6 full-time employees, and wonderful, wonderful group of people. And then 2008 hit, recession, which I had no idea we were in a recession.
I remember it well. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
I had no idea.
The only year we didn't make any money. Yeah.
Yeah. And I kept going, what am I doing wrong? And I hired a salesperson, and I was not in tune with what was going on in the external world at that time. I wasn't even that in tune to politics or anything. I was just like working hard at my business. And so I ended up helping everyone in the organization find another position. And, slowly over a year, I did take on quite a bit of debt, at that time, to keep salaries going and stuff, but felt really good about what I did, because I didn't just sever the ties and say, too bad, it's up to you to figure it out. And at the same time, shortly after that, in 2010, I lost my youngest brother to suicide. And, I think between those two events, it was like God or the universe just telling me, you need to change. There's something you need to change here. And it took me, a lot of self-reflection and to figure it out, but it was really about, what are you doing? Just growing this company because you want the fame or, the attention of growing this company. I always had these monetary goals, we hit 1 million in revenue. Yay. That kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But, it forced me, I guess, to look deeper at what was really important. And I realized one of my most important values is freedom. It's family. It's having fun. It's those kind of things. And I realized that I wasn't doing that. I wasn't spending enough time with my family. I wasn't making the time for fun. And I was just so busy building that and didn't really realize that.
Yeah.
So,
and that points out, what, that leads me, and we'll go back a little bit in your family coming up, but it leads me to a very specific point about self-reflection. And, we mentioned power over others versus power within. And I've taken away a few things from you. Number one, initiative. Okay. You always took initiative. You've mentioned interpersonal skills twice, maybe three times. I'd have to go back and check. Adapting and creativity. But this self-reflective portion of that tragedy with your brother is extremely important. You know, sometimes it takes a tragedy like that, or as we mentioned, COVID, to make people really go deep inside. And what I've learned, Laurie, from this conversation so far is those leaders who reflect, self-reflect, are the ones that develop those interpersonal skills and take them to higher levels. But anyhow, so let's just go back. You obviously had brothers, and keep your thought.
Yeah.
You know, tell us, you know, as a girl in a big, large family, you know, you obviously learned these skills. What did you learn about, you mentioned your brother, what did you learn about boys? What did you see?
Yeah.
Boys and later on, you know, men or young men or whatnot. What did you learn about us?
Yeah, early on, it seemed like the boys were favored in our family. You know, it seemed like I remember one of my brothers. I have 5 brothers, so had 5 brothers. One of them, it was we would catch him up late at night watching TV with my dad and stepmom, and we were, you know, it was like we were treated differently, for sure, you know, and you could see that. And the message was, even like my dad was a contractor and a builder and stuff, just his, you know, he was self-employed too. And he, you know, he'd let me mow the lawn and stuff, but he never taught me how to run the backhoe. He never taught me how to do those kind of things. And I know I could have done it. And even today I go, I wish I would have learned that skill. So we were definitely treated differently, you know, and it was, it felt to me, and this could just be my own perception, but it felt to me like we would work harder, we would do more than the boys had to do. They seemed to be able to do the fun stuff, but you know, it may not have been fun to them, but looking at it, it was like, oh, we were doing the dishes, the house cleaning, the cooking, the this, the that, you know,
That's
and it was kind of stay in your lane.
that's an amazing observation. I got to tell you, I mean, because I learned everything from everybody that comes on the show. That is incredible observation, and it made, you know, women are capable. You know what? But those men, those boys in your family, and many men, including myself, I had 2 older sisters. Even the way we're trained or raised makes us feel that women are not capable. And it's interesting that you say that, because I've done things and my wife says, what do you think? I don't know how to do it. And you just made me realize, here I am at 62. You made me realize that's an ingrained perception. The guys that are listening, I got to tell you, women are capable. We got to stop that.
Yeah.
Anyhow, sorry,
Yeah.
I mean to get off.
Well, the thought that pops into my head, John, when you say that, though, at the same time, I do think there is value in some of those roles and the family unit. And I suspect, I fear, I want to say that there is like, there's a breakup of the family unit. And so part of me, it's not that it's all bad or anything, but it's important, I think, for us to be able to look at it objectively and realize that, you know, there are certain things that women and men are better at and good at and all of that. But if we do that with knowledge, if we do that, you know, and say, this is why, and here's what we're doing and all of that, I think it would feel better to people to understand that, you know, so I'm not saying people should stay within their roles, but I do think there's something to be said about knowing our strengths, whether it's because we're female or male or disc style or our experience or our physical build, but knowing what those are, knowing what our passions are, and then aligning ourselves to that.
What you say is true. So let me ask you this. That being said, and roles, right? We know how the world is now.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. When a guy opens a door for you, you know, a restaurant or wherever, how do you feel?
I love it. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I, at the same time, will open a door for a guy.
See,
I don't think anything of it.
No, and that is exactly what you just said. It makes perfect sense. because like we just said, ladies are not incapable. To me, opening a door or extending a nicety or exhibiting some
Yeah.
etiquette is not a show of weakness. It's a show and a sign of respect. And
Yes.
it's giving a fellow human being, whether she's a she or it gives respect and dignity. And why not etiquette? Why not? Isn't that a
Yes.
role that men should be filling?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, it's to me, it's kind of sad that we let all this PC political correctness get in the way of being human. And I saw that early on when I started my training
Mm.
business. I was hired to do a sexual harassment training for a county sheriff's office. And it was a subcontracting job. And I went in to do it. And I just remember thinking, I don't even agree with half of this stuff. It's like, we need to be human. We don't need to tiptoe around each other. And sure, people have gone too far on the, discrimination and things like that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. But we need to get back to being human, respect those principles, those values that we have. And then there's no issues of all of this diversity and inclusion. It doesn't matter, like you're going to include and you're going to celebrate diversity. It has nothing to do with color and this and that. It's those basics.
No, I totally believe. I believe exactly what you're saying. I've flipped through a book here real quick. I'm always writing down thoughts and what you just said, that bit of wisdom. Sometimes or mostly, and take this in the right context, we give ourselves too much credit for being something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, more often than not, we don't give ourselves enough credit for being human.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly,
Yes.
you just hit, kudos to you. You just hit the nail on the head.
Well, and I love the way you articulated it because that's it.
Well, I just took what you said and I just reinforced it because that's the way I'm thinking too. And Laurie, you were right. Why can't we be more human? And why do we have to have labels which seem to divide us even more? Why?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Think about yeah. Give me some thoughts on that. Your leadership style,
Mm-hmm.
without labels. How would that work?
Yeah. Well, I think, labels, like you said, separate us, they pigeonhole us. And I try to go, back further and go, why do people even use labels? What is their need to do that? And sometimes, of course, it's just an innocent way to make life easier and faster and all of that. But more times than not, I think it's a fear. I think it boils down to fear. It's like we have to label somebody something so that we can put them in that box, or we can make them, we can manipulate it, or we can control it in the way we want to. Humans, to me, are just quite fascinating, really, when you think about the mix of we're animal with instinct, right? But yet we have this soul and this spirit, and we know that we're going to die, for example, and animals don't know that, right? So we have this. It's like this almost paradox, and it's like, if we maybe sometimes people are afraid, they're like anxious that they are going to die someday. I don't know, I'm going pretty deep, but my mind is just like, and then they hold on to something, and whether it's something to make them feel secure, whether it's something to make their ego feel bigger. I think it boils down to fear, why people end up labeling and discriminating and all those kinds of things. Maybe it's an insecurity. They need to feel like they're somewhere else. The reason that I bring up fear too, and even trying to understand it, is not to make an excuse for it, not at all. I use that so that I don't take it personally. I don't take the behavior personally, because it's so easy to get hung up on taking somebody's behavior personally, that then you're not objective and your judgment is clouded. You think it's all about you, and it has nothing to do with you, really. If you think about it, if I come on your show today, John, and I'm like all happy and give you a compliment, it's probably more about how I was feeling than if I come on your show today and I'm like, that kind of thing. It's not about you. It's more about how, where it's coming from inside. And So I think it's important for us all to remember that, because we can so easily let people push our buttons, take it personally, when if we can look at it objectively, then we can come at it more objectively and help and hopefully find a solution, and at the very least walk away, if it's not something that you want to stay by.
No, you're totally correct. And fear, I'm glad you mentioned fear too. A couple of things: take nothing personal. We'll talk a bit about that. But when you lead by fear, as we're pointing out, there might be a tendency to cause division, and especially by the people we lead. And I think that that's a great point. I heard somebody the other day say, I try to be optimistic 99% of the time, and the other 1% is my fear telling me that I'm wrong. And so, and that's, fear is huge, and leaders who are fearful, and rightfully, there's different types of fear, I guess. If a bear is coming after us, we're going to do
right.
something. But most fear is what Churchill says, it's just fear itself. There's nothing to fear, really. It's all in our mindset.
Yeah. So true. It's so true. And it's not that, we shouldn't even stuff fear down or anything like that. It's more about having like you were saying, some fear, we have to know what to do with that fear. Is this a flight or fight kind of thing? Do we have to run from that bear? Do we have to fake dead? Do we power through that fear, be courageous, and go through to the other side so that we can feel that you feel so much more free after that. So it's more to me about courage than it is about the fear. Yeah, but fear holds us back, right? Fear, the way we react to it. Yeah,
it's true, and a lot of times, the wisdom or the way we handle fear comes by our experience in life. And what I've always said to people is that it's kind of strange. Every time I've been fearful of something, and this is going to happen, or that's going to happen, or I think it might happen, it rarely happens, and everything seems to work out. But we still tell this to ourselves, but we continue sometimes to beat ourselves up. So remain fearful.
Yeah, and I just heard something the other day, you made me remember it, that worry is like praying for something bad to happen. And I thought that is so brilliant, because it is, you're just dwelling on that bad thing. So worry is just kind of one of those.
No, that's pretty cool. I love these conversations, and I what I'm starting to feel, and I know you can read it in what people write and what people say. I feel like there's something that's happening right now. Now, this might be cliche, or maybe this is too topical, rhetorical, but I feel like more and more people are delving inside deeper, even though there's a cancel culture and we hear all that. I think that's a small percentage of people. I think people, men and women, are starting to dig deeper. You just said a second ago, I'm going deep, I know. But that's what we're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I couldn't agree more. From my experience, I've been in this line of work for quite a while, and I've had the passion of digging deeper for longer than that. And I definitely notice people are willing to do that self-reflection. It's kind of like, it is the Great Awakening. It's people are looking inside and going, what's really going on here? And they're also like being forced, kind of with everything that's happening in the world, to look outside and go, what's really going on here? And then it helps us to choose what's important to us in life. So if we know what our priorities, our principles, our values are, then it's not always easy, but at least we have something to align to. And I think what's happened in our world, and I'll say the US because that's where I live, but I suspect it's beyond that, is that a lot of us are lost. We've lost that. There's so many things that are vying for our attention. And I even think about that with my youngest brother. He lost his life to suicide. I had a second brother, same thing, and it was just devastating for our family. And you think about it, and the thing that the two of them had in common, I would say, is that they were a bit lost. One was into drugs and alcohol, the second one, the first one was not, and both, of course, extremely devastating, shocking. Never would have thought that would happen. But, you wonder how much fear, of course, who am I supposed to be? What is the world telling me? Who do I talk to? Especially for men, I've noticed it seems, at least in my limited experience with the men in my life and working with men and stuff, is it's almost not, it's not okay for them to talk about being vulnerable. And then sometimes the ones that do maybe take it too far for society, and then they're thinking, oh, they're feminist, they're feminized or something. And I do, it's a delicate balance, I think, for men. I think it's tough.
The word lost invoked something that I read a couple of months ago, where the first time in American education history that women enrollments in college have now surpassed the men, that less and less boys, young men, are going away to school. And it's interesting that you say that, because the number one response in the survey of men, boys, younger guys not going to college is they, quote, feel lost, unquote.
Wow.
That's pretty, so what that makes me, the importance of having a purpose.
Yes.
Is so, why are men depressed? Depression's up, what, 69%? I was reading a report, mentalhealth.net. General anxiety for guys the last couple of years is up 55%.
It didn't help being, ostracized from everyone, not allowed to, interact with each other and stuff. I mean, at least guys, they can pick on each other and do it in their own way and just get together. And I'm sure that's been a big part of it.
Well, even guys, the American Psychological Association guidelines that just came out last year, they literally, in so many words, say that traditional masculine roles may be an illness. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And you mentioned something, guys that become vulnerable, or they're willing to make contact with their inner selves, they do get ostracized. And that's why a lot, that's societal standards, I guess, in America anyways, but it is. And that's one reason why I think it is important to reach out to not the other side, female humans, to find out what it is that they do that make them leaders in their own right. And then maybe we, by de facto, we learn something from each other.
I can't help but think of Harville Hendrix and, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. It's kind of like we are different creatures, and we do, we can learn from each other for sure, and it's,
what can women do? So what can women do? What can women do? What can female leaders do?
What can female leaders do for what, John?
For the world? What can they do for the world? The way it is now, with so many guys struggling.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things I think is a great opportunity for women leaders is to provide a psychologically safe place to be human and male and female, and, be able to just be yourself. And in fact, someone was saying just the other day, they were talking about how they felt like, the advantages were all for the men in this business that they're in. And they were going on. And I said, well, one of the main things we can do is to stop taking it so personally. It is what it is. We are where we are. So let's just look at it like that, and then say, how can we show up, not in a way that we're wounded or victimized or hurt, but how can we help? How can we help shine the light for other people that maybe don't see that, some of that's happening, what I was just talking about with the, male dominated world, or vice versa. It's being able to hold that space so that somebody can be real, so as a woman leader, I think, and there's many women leaders, believe me, that do not handle emotions well. They would rather avoid it like the plague, and there's a time and a place for sure. Emotional intelligence is really understanding your own emotions, being aware of them, being able to manage those, and also having a social element where you're looking at someone else and you're realizing this person is struggling, or you're even caring about that they are expressing an emotion right now. And then how do you help manage that with that person? You know, in other words, don't be gasoline on the fire, right? Like, don't add to that. And that's, so emotional intelligence is something that we as humans can do. And I hesitate to divide that, you know, at all by gender, because I really have experienced men that have high emotional intelligence and women that have high emotional intelligence, and both that avoid the topic. But one of the things that we both can do is to allow the space for that, you know, especially one-on-one, have a conversation, not call somebody out in a meeting and then, you know, in front of everyone, but later say, hey, John, can we have a quick chat? And then just say, you know, I noticed you were breathing heavy and you rolled your eyes and stuff. Is there anything you want to talk about? Create some space for it, have the conversations, so that people have that opportunity to release. Because if they don't release on you as a leader, which means just let them vent up. That's part of your role, is to listen and be able to help them redirect that, help them maybe shift their thoughts and beliefs, help them with some stress management techniques. Be that person that is there to help them be the person they're meant to be, right? And so sometimes it's clearing roadblocks for that.
No, that's some great advice, a great tip there for lady leaders who are listening. You know, talk to us about your book a little bit, you know, Leading with Grit, you know.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about grit, because I was seeing a lot of grit in upper leadership. And there was all this talk of, oh, we need more grit, you know, and I thought, do we really? Because I'm seeing a lot of upper management with a ton of grit. You know, they're just like, they're plowing through it. They're just like, bam, and they're getting stuff done, and they're tenacious. And what I wasn't seeing is grit in a balanced way, so that long term, you didn't create collateral damage that then ruined everything you worked for. So generosity, respect, integrity, and truth is the acronym that I came up with for grit, to help people see that, you know, it takes more than just that passion and perseverance and driving toward a goal. Those are important, not to discount that. But what we often can do is leave collateral damage, whether it's to other people, relationships, you know, you're just, you know, hurting other people along the way, or yourself, your health, stress. So there's a lot of collateral damage we can end up with when we just focus on grit. Even when you're passionate, even when you love what you do, you still, you know, if anybody's ever focused on a goal at the expense of some other areas in their life, they know what I'm talking about. I've done it myself. I know when I was younger, a single mom going to college, I focused so hard on getting great grades that, wow, I was sick at the end of every semester. And then I remember just thinking, you know, looking back, I was like, I probably didn't really spend the time that I should have with my daughter, you know, because I was so hyper focused on this goal of getting like a 4.0 GPA or something. You know, it was just like, what are you doing? So I had grit with that, but it wasn't enough really when you think about your whole entire life. So it's important with the grit acronym, in order to get that grit that's sustainable without collateral damage, we actually start at the, we inverse it. So we start with truth, and we understand who we are, what we're all about, what's important to us in all aspects of our life. It's just an understanding, it's an awareness and an appreciation of where we are right now and who we are. And then integrity is about aligning to that. So if I know who I am and what's important to me, say health and wellness is important, but then I go home and I just, you know, kick back on the couch, eat Snickers bars, watch TV all night. Is that really important to me? It's kind of a litmus test for us too. We can go, you know, is this really important to me? Do I need to change my actions? It's for us to look at. It's not somebody else to judge us with. So integrity is about aligning to your truth. And it's also about realizing that it's not about perfection. So we do the best that we can do. It's an opportunity, this grit roadmap, to be able to look objectively, to self-reflect. And then respect, as we know, it's of course about respecting others, but first we have to respect ourselves. If we don't respect ourselves, how will we ever be good, to show up for somebody else? And I use that analogy of the flight attendant. It's like she tells you to put the oxygen mask on yourself before the person sitting next to you. And I literally experienced this with my daughter. She was about 2 years old the first time that I flew with her. And the flight attendant said that. And I was like, wait a minute, I would put that on her first. And my gut would have been to put that on her first. And so many people end up sometimes doing that at the expense of themselves. They don't think ahead of where they really should be focused. We've got to focus on ourselves first, not at the expense of other people, but just so that we are strong, enough to do the things, show up the way we need to as a leader. And the last step is generosity. When we know ourselves, truth, when we align to that integrity, when we respect ourselves and others, it comes natural. You have this feeling of abundance rather than scarcity. You want to have that one-on-one with your direct report and help them see what they need to do better. You want to spend that time listening to somebody. It's not something that you feel like you have to do. You really want to do it. And this creates sustainability. This creates, you're going to get those goals and you're not going to damage things on the way. So that's what grit is all about. And I actually was using grit in my training with, people for years, but didn't have a name for it. And it was a group of us that sat around brainstorming in my company one time, and we had all this stuff written all over the walls. And the funny thing was, we were talking about old Westerns, John Wayne, True Grit. And all of a sudden I looked, and generosity, respect, integrity, and truth were just like, out there. And I said, oh my goodness, this is it. This is exactly how we can use this to describe a great roadmap to keep people on a leadership track, but also help them to feel good about themselves and treat others the right way. Yeah.
No, it is, thank you for sharing that story. It's easy to remember. Anybody can figure it out, so, and there's, if you're listening between the lines, you just mentioned listening, there's a lot more than just those 4 attributes for sure.
Yes.
You hit upon compassion, you hit upon tolerance, mindset, the listening we just talked about, but there's so much more, priorities and values, core values you touched upon.
It's a lot to unpack, the grit.
Yeah, it really is. It seems, think, just the word think, using our common sense or our critical thinking or objective reasoning. How many people do that now?
Right.
There's a lot of people just lashing
question
out.
things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so leadership, I totally agree with you. Leadership and human beings are fascinating, and how we interact. And probably when I'm gleaning from you about all of this is tolerance, being tolerant of others' viewpoints. We do know our place. If we are in charge of something, there's a way that we can manage those whom follow us. And it is fascinating. And I think that people like yourself, Laurie, are on the front lines of this huge shift in leadership consciousness. I really do. And it's amazing to me how far humans have come, but it's also amazing and challenging to know how far we need to go still, just by the way the world is.
And it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time to be alive, really, because I think we're on a huge spiritual shift. I think that there is something, like I said earlier, like we're awakening as human beings. We're taking it to that next level, and that's exciting. And it's not exciting, the damage that's happening to people's lives and those kind of things. I don't want to come across as not appreciating that, because I certainly do. But I do think it's a great opportunity to look inside, to self-reflect, to decide what's really important to you in life. what's really important, and living that, not just at home or not just at work, but we're just going to emulate that. We're going to be that person. And so when you say the word tolerate, I know some people think of that as kind of a negative. Oh, I'm just tolerating someone. I don't think of it that way at all. I think of it more as being present and holding space and respecting and, you know, being okay with the differences, and a little more patient when it comes to the way somebody else is. And it's that kind of spirit, right? Like, yeah.
No, I'm with you on that. So, you know, do you have let me ask you this, Laurie, do you have like a personal quote that you've made up or that you live by every day? Do you have one?
Yeah. And, you know, I'll confess, I'm terrible at remembering the nitty gritty of quotes. I love them. They're all through my book. They're all through my Grit Productivity Planner. And whenever somebody says, what's your favorite quote? I don't know what it is, but I sit there and I go, but so one of them that I love, and I'm trying to even think who said it. It says something about tiny matters. What lies before us and what lies beneath us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us.
Yeah.
I love that quote. And I think of it all the time because it sums up kind of what we were just talking about, because it's like those things, the COVID stuff, all of this stuff, you know, it's like, yeah, they're huge. Yes, it's like, oh my gosh. But it's way more important what's going on inside of us as a result of that. And it goes back to, you know, how we react to something is way more important than what happens, right? Like and that growth and that, yeah, just that growth inside of us is so much more important. So I love that quote. Emerson, somebody, I think.
I'm going to be looking it up, but I totally love that. You know, one thing that I do like that you said, and, you know, as leaders, is that there are opportunities. And even in the face of all the stuff that's been going on and all the negativity that's out there, there are opportunities, and that, you know, opportunities instill hope and or can instill hope. And
lots of hope.
Yeah, lots of hope. And I feel as leaders, you know, if we look for the opportunities to self-improve, you just said that, then I think we stand a much better chance of moving our own lives and those whom we influence around us in a positive way. And it's the give back, I guess. You know, how can people get your book? How can they find out more information about you, Laurie? And tell us those things. You know, how can we get your book?
Okay, yeah, great. I'd love to connect. I love to, as you can probably tell, I love to just collaborate and connect. So LinkedIn is the only social media that I use, and I do use it actively. So you can find me just by searching my name, LaurieSudbrink, Laurie Sudbrink. So you can follow me there. You can get my book either through my website, which will just take you to Amazon. So I don't have the distribution for my book, but at Amazon, you could go right to amazon.com/gritty stuff, GRITTYSTUFF, and I have a storefront there. I have the Grit Productivity Planner, and I also have the Leading with Grit book. And recently, Soundview Executive Summaries picked up my book, and so if your company is a member of Soundview Executive Summaries, I love that. I've been a member for a very long time. They take the great books and they summarize them into about 8 pages, so that you can get the cliff notes first, and then get the book if you want to. But it's a great service. So yeah, that's how to connect with me. My website is my name as well, lauriesudbrink.com.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you for sharing all that, Laurie. Thank you for being here. You know, I'm so glad we reconnected, because the world has changed. The last time we were on a show and had this great conversation, the world was different, and the world is constantly changing. Sorry about the dog.
That's okay. I love it.
That's my little Jack Russell Terrier. I think there's a rabbit out back. But anyhow, it's great to see you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, John. And that's so cute. He goes, I want to pipe in on this. I want to thank you too, and keep shining your light on this very important topic, because men, women, people, humanity. I think the more that we become more human, like you said, the better off all of us are going to be. None of us have all the answers for all of what's going on, but all of us can look at being more human and connect with each other.
Well said, Laurie. You know, you gave us a lot of things to think about as leaders, and couldn't agree with you more. I appreciate you as a human being, and I'm so glad you're closer to your daughter now. You know, you'll be able to be the great mother that you are. And I look forward to the next conversation, and maybe we'll come up with a collaboration someday ourselves. But thank you very much.
Great. Love it. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for listening to another episode of Well. Without you, we don't exist. We hope the men who joined us today learned some valuable tips to improve and not be ashamed to use them. Be the change, set the example, keep going, men. And for the women leaders out there, keep creating and keep helping us men to become even better men, more effective leaders. Thank you. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and lead.